This is Phantology.
You may have heard of us.
Hello, members of the Reaper Division, and welcome to another episode of Phantology. I am your host, Ryan, joined together with my cousin and lifelong friend, Josh, to discuss the final two books of the Cradle series. I was about to say the Cradle trilogy. No, it's a series. And the books are Dreadgod, Book 11, and Waybound, Book 12. Welcome, Josh.
Hey Ryan, nice to finally get around to doing this. It's been a bit since Book 12 came out, but
yeah,
you know.
I think it came out maybe close to 2 months ago. I think it was the beginning of June. We're recording this at the end of July, so yeah, it's been a little bit, but definitely a great series. I think we should jump into it. I think we are just going to discuss our general thoughts on Book 11 because it's been a little bit since both of us have read Book 11, a couple months at this point, and I think we want to dedicate the bulk of our time to talking about Waybound and our thoughts on the series in general.
Yeah,
Sounds good,
I like
Josh?
that. Yeah.
All right. So, Book 11, I think, was another compelling book in the overall plot. I don't think it's the best. I think it's probably one of the better books in the series. I don't know.
Yep. It did feel a little bit like moving pieces around on the board, kind of cleaning some things up before we could go into the final battle of sorts.
Yeah.
But that's fine, like that's what you kind of expect from a penultimate book in a series like this, is that it's going to set things up well for the last book, and it succeeded in doing that.
Well, with that being said, I wasn't sure how they were going to wrap everything up in Waybound, because at the end of Book 11, Dreadgod, you still have 4 out of 5 Dreadgods left. You still have all of the monarchs left on Cradle, and you still have the whole Abaddon plotline with Athen and the Mad King and what's the name? What's the name of the head of the Abaddon, or kind of like the leader who doesn't like Athen, who's been trying to find his scythe? Machiel.
Oh, yeah.
That's it. Machiel the Hound. You have basically all of those things, and these aren't like super long books, so I was not really sure what was going to happen, how he was going to wrap it all up.
Yeah, I think that it was a little bit ambiguous, because there was always the promise that you were going to get to things off of Cradle. From the very beginning, there was the sense that it was going to be a little bit of a story beyond Cradle, which we can, we'll obviously talk more about that in Book 12. So you're right. There was a lot to wrap up, still on Cradle. There was everything that with all the Dreadgods, with all the kind of political maneuvering and the Charity's clan, and all of that, to
Akura,
wrap up
the Akura
clan.
clan.
The Akura clan. Yeah. And so you're right. There was a lot to do that was still left off at the ending of Book 11.
Yeah. And I think you're right with ambiguity, because we weren't necessarily sure how much Will White had intended to finish up. My understanding going in was that it would be totally wrapped up, and this would kind of be the end of Lyndon and Yaren's story.
Yeah. And so I think that that's going to be a lot of what we talk about in Book 12, because I think that that's, from the little conversation I've seen, that seems to be kind of the most divisive stuff, is his decision to not wrap everything up.
Okay, and so let's finish talking. So we're kind of done talking about Book 11. We didn't talk about it much. Sorry if you were expecting more than that. We both liked it. If you've read the first 10 books of Cradle, you're gonna like Book 11. I don't really see you stopping because of anything that happens in book 11. So now let's do quick spoiler free to talk book 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'll let you start with this one.
First, yeah, a little bit of meta conversation about it is
Okay.
this was kind of hard for me to really get going on and want to finish because
I agree.
because it really is just like an emotional thing to finish the series, you know, and
Okay.
I have been on kind of like a book slump from after I finished it. I tried a few things to pull me out of it, but it's been kind of hard to finish, and I didn't, and that was kind of maybe marred my experience reading it a little bit, is because I kept like not really wanting to be done with Lyndon's story, because it really, the last few months has been such an escape for me. And yeah, it was just one of those classic like book depression things that made it a little bit hard for me to want to finish it.
Okay, so your hesitance was more like dragging your feet because you didn't want it to end.
Yeah, exactly. It was like when you're saying goodbye to someone and you just drag out the goodbye for too long. You know, it's like
Yeah.
where now it's like you both know that you need to go, and
Mhm.
you don't, like, neither one of you want to, but you got to. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of what it felt like.
I think that's overall like a great endorsement of the series
Mhm.
and the characters created. Um, I so when I said I agree, it was I I mean, so I had read the first 11 books. I don't know, maybe six. I finished the 11th book maybe 6 months ago. So I feel like there has been like a significant period of time between reading Dreadgod and Waybound. And I think it took a while for me to get into the book.
Mm.
And I feel like it was overall. I mean, I've seen some people react kind of negatively to Waybound, and I thought I really liked it overall. Like I said, it was slow getting into, but I think it was a great ending. It wasn't like the best ending I've ever read. It wasn't it wasn't like a Sanderlanche at the end where it's like, tons of like unexpected things are like, blowing your mind one after the other. Um, but I mean, overall, I was pretty happy with, what happens with the characters, what happens with the plot.
Yeah. I totally agree. And endings are really, really hard to do for a lot of authors. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, especially endings of series. I think endings of books, obviously, most authors are pretty good at, but
Hmm.
it's not very, you look at the number of marquee 10 plus book series there are out there, and like there's not too many of them that I'm really aware of. I'm sure there are a lot from like smaller authors and stuff, but
Hmm.
that's one of the things that sets it, like something like the Wheel of Time, apart, is it is so long and such a long series and has an ending. And same thing with like Malazan and stuff. Now, this I hesitate to compare to something like the Wheel of Time or Malazan, because the books are a lot shorter. They're probably half the length, to like even a third of the length of some of the longer
It's not
Wheel of
really
Time
epic
books.
fantasy.
Yeah, and it's not exactly. There's not that many characters. There are a lot of characters, but there's not that characters go in and out of the story a lot. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you're
Hmm.
thinking about the Wheel of Time, like there's a ton of characters you have to keep track of,
Yeah.
and there's just nowhere near that many. So like there's a ton of differences, but the point still stands, is that he's still having to wrap up like a long series that a lot of people are pretty attached to in a
Yeah.
compelling way, and that's not something that a lot of people have experience doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that like even though it's not epic fantasy, I do see it talked a lot about with like alongside these other series. So I think like fans of epic fantasy and fans of Cradle have like a lot of them read the same types of books. Like the Venn diagram, like I think there's just a lot in common in the center. Um,
So it's been hard for me to place this book series, because I see a lot of people really, really like it. Like, it has a pretty big following, like you go on like Goodreads, and it has book 12, it has, or book 11 has 13,000 people reviewing it, like 14,000 for book 10. Like, obviously this is like a well-known series. That being said, just in the way that books are talked about, at least in like my corner of the internet, even people that really like this book, like I don't really see them putting like the characters on like the top character lists or stuff like that. You know what I mean? It just doesn't get that much attention when people are creating some of the lists of their favorite series or books or characters or settings. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of confused as to that. I don't think it does anything better than like the best, but it has solid characters, has a solid setting, has a solid magic system, and it has solid plots. You know what I mean? So I'm a little bit confused as to why it doesn't have more people singing its praises.
Yeah, I mean, I think that overall it's a fun read. It's like, a fast-paced, fun read that, like you said, most aspects of it are solid. Um, and but I mean, me personally, like, I don't find myself like too attached to the characters in it. Like, I'm not, I don't know. I mean, other than Lyndon, who I'm like fairly attached to, but I'm not like constantly, I don't know, like thinking about like all the different things Lyndon's gonna do. Like I didn't find myself as I'm reading it like trying to predict like, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be cool if Lyndon did this or this or this. I wasn't like, before book 12 came out, I wasn't really like theorizing a lot about what was going to happen in the book. And I mean, maybe that's something that I don't do as much as I'm older. I'm not like, if I'm waiting for another book to come out, I don't spend a lot of time anymore thinking about the next book.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go read something else while I wait.
Yeah. Like I
So maybe,
remember. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
well, maybe that's I guess I'm kind of rambling a bit, but I'm thinking now like maybe that's less about Cradle and more about me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of the same way. Like I remember when we were in college and stuff, we'd go theorize a bunch about Stormlight, and that was when even just like I think Words of Radiance had just come out and we were all theorizing about everything and we were deep in
Yeah,
like 17th chart and stuff. And like now, even though I think there's just more to theorize about, none of us are really that deep into it. And maybe that's because we've started Fantology that gives us more room to talk about a wider breadth of series without going as deep into like a few series. That being said, I don't know. It's just I guess I just wish that Cradle had a little bit more um, relevance in the conversations about fantasy than it does. Um, so
okay.
but that being said, I don't know if I'd put it. It probably, honestly, I started out pretty doubtful on that this series would like crack my top 10 series lists. And not that I have like a specific list. Like I don't think I've sat down and formalized like my top 10 series in a long time. But like kind of the way I thought about it, I don't think it was until like the last few books where I'm like, this has a good shot at probably popping up on like a top 10 list if I were to seriously sit down, put it together, because everything is just like the fundamentals are there. And I really enjoyed so much of it.
Yeah. I I think overall it's pretty polished, it's a good series, fun to read, polished. I mean, it's pretty accessible. There wouldn't be like too much content, like I guess there's violence. So I think nowadays it's probably hard to read a lot of fantasy if you're trying to stay away from violence though. Um, so I mean, there wouldn't be a lot of things that would keep somebody from reading this series.
Right. I definitely be comfortable recommending this to any like 13 plus, you know what I mean? And even lower if their parents are like, oh yeah, they play violent video games and aren't phased by it. I'd be like, okay,
Yeah.
then go for it. Like even around like 10, 11,
All
you
right.
know.
Yeah, I think so too. Um, so did you did you like this ending? Did you love it? Think it was okay?
It was
Not
more than
okay.
okay. I think I liked it. I liked it. I don't know if I loved it. I think that I was expecting a more definitive end than just
Okay.
basically this whole series being a prologue for another series.
Okay. Well, let's jump into spoilers then.
Yeah.
So, if you haven't read the book and you're listening and you don't want to hear spoilers, then stop now. Come back after you finish the book. All right, let's jump straight into that. So, I'm guessing you're talking about you expected, I don't know, Lyndon and his friends to ascend, and then like the ending maybe to be like some final climax battle between, the Abidan and the forces of the Mad King and the Vroshir, something like that.
Yeah, I expected the way I thought that this book was going to go is they were basically going to wreck all the dread gods within the first, 20% and then ascend. And then the rest of the book would be them finishing up the whole Abaddon plot line.
Yeah.
Now I adjusted my expectations pretty quickly after, I was like, it was, halfway through, 2/3 of the way through, and they hadn't done that yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then so that's when I kind of started realizing like, okay, yeah, like this isn't going to be the ending that I was expecting.
I think I had similar expectations.
And here's the thing. It just didn't feel like an ending. Like Mistborn, I think most people are aware that like there's multiple eras of Mistborn. So like but Mistborn era 1 feels like an ending. You know what I mean? Even Mistborn
Yeah.
era 2 feels like an ending. Maybe a little bit less so, like, but like these feel like endings to that series.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't feel like an ending to like the Cradle series. This feels like I said, like a very long prologue to like another series.
I mean, I like half agree. Like, I see where you're coming from, and I think that the Abidan stuff was wrapped up quickly, and it does feel like it's setting up for a greater series. But then, like, you think about it, it's called Cradle. It's not called like whatever extended universe this like all these iterations take place in. So I mean, like I do think that Will White, like the way that it was written, it certainly like leads you to have like expectations of like helping Ethan and like fighting the Mad King and all of that, which they didn't help out at all. It was all resolved without them. um but I think that like their story did sort of feel wrapped up in the sense that Yaren and Lyndon have a child together. I
Yeah,
mean, you have like the jump into the future where you see where they're at.
and that was pretty tender with him, with their kid and him
Yeah.
reaching into the bowl or whatever to of Madra to get their
Mm-hmm.
thing. Yeah, like that was neat. Um, and like I said, like I don't want to trash this because it was different than I expected. Um, because I don't want to trash it at all. It was good. Um, I
Well,
just
I think
yeah,
there's a difference. We know that, or I know that you expressing your thoughts,
right.
like your reservations, things you would have preferred differently, isn't trashing it.
Yeah, but I think yeah, that's how I mean. I hope that's how it comes across because I'm super excited about the possibility of a new series. Um, I it just it seemed like yeah, it just seemed like it wasn't quite like what maybe there could have been some better expectation setting earlier on in the series. Um, what did you think about like the new um well it goes back to what I was some of my issues is that it just seemed like uh whenever Lyndon would get more powers, he would just be confronted with stronger enemies. So it never really felt like he was progressing that much. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And like
Yeah.
finally, you felt like he had progressed, especially when that guy came back. Oh, what was his name? And Lyndon just totally like destroyed him.
Like Lee Kuth or Lee Markuth, I
Yeah,
think.
Lemur. Yeah. And Lyndon just totally wrecks him in that ring.
I agree. I think that was a really good touch to add on, and he comes back expecting. I loved that from Lee Markuth's perspective. That was like he comes back expecting to like kind of wreck people without interference from the Abidan, and then he like is fighting Lyndon, and Lyndon's like, "Don't you remember me? You killed me." It was like, chills at that part for me.
Yeah,
It
by
was,
far one of the best parts of the whole series.
yeah.
Like that was the payoff that we all wanted.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't want to say it was like undercut it at all because it wasn't. But when he then just ascends and immediately is like now being matched with power more or less by
With the Silver Lord.
yeah, like you're now like, okay, now I have to learn like all these silver lords and like it just
Yeah.
kind of felt like, okay, that's kind of what we've been doing for 12 bucks now. Like
Hmm.
maybe we can spend a little bit more time watching Lyndon wreck people.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, for better or worse, like you kind of see that like with him taking on two dread gods and a monarch at once, right? With Rhaegon Shen. I mean, actually two monarchs, right? Because he's fighting the weeping tight or not the weeping, the Titan, the Phoenix, Rhaegon Shen, and Shamiara at once. Um, but I say for better or worse, I mean, it shows his power that he's even able to like fight them without dying at once. For worse, I say it because personally, I felt like a lot of the plot of this story was like it, it was kind of like I don't know, they're like all training, and so like first he's fighting Rhaegon Shen. I wasn't really invested in the story until after the weeping dragon was vanquished. And but that took up so much time. And I feel like it didn't leave that much time for a lot of like the more critical battles in this series, like being like fighting the other two dread gods. Like, and I thought he was going to beat like one of them and then the other was going to be stronger, like get all the power. And then, he has like, the hardest fight of basically the book, but he like kills them both at the same exact time. It was a little disappointing for me, that battle, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It it just goes back to feeling like maybe a little bit too much time was spent on Cradle with just big battles, which we've had a lot of for the series. Um,
Hmm.
that being said, it was cool. Like it was cool to watch Lyndon fly around and do all these cool moves and like get pushed to his brink. And like that's kind of the reason why I love the series is because that happens in most every book. And so I was happy to see it here too. It just did feel like it dragged on a little and like kind of messed with the pacing of the book. But here's the thing, like I feel like every book in Cradle has these kind of issues, and I haven't really focused on them before because I've been more focused on the bigger picture that the series is painting. So I feel a little bit like uncharitable, maybe talking about pacing issues in this book because I've kind of glossed over those issues up until now.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's just exacerbated. They're more apparent in book 12 because there's so much to wrap up. You don't really have the you don't really have like the ability to kind of like put off like other battles until like further books. You need to resolve it here. I think that in my opinion, in order to have been better written, or I mean, or in if I were writing this book, I think Lyndon and his team needed to be stronger going into it so that he didn't need to spend as much time leveling them up. I think they should have dedicated like more time to like maybe fighting each dread god and kind of making each battle unique. Um I guess I did like the aspect of fighting two dread gods at once. Um but it seemed like I don't know, the dread gods like they were becoming like more personified and more like intelligent and like becoming like better villains as the book was progressing. And so I think it would have been really cool to see like one dread god left and see what that would have looked like. I mean, I guess Lyndon is kind of considered his own dread god. So it would have been like two dread gods left. But I think it would have been cool to see what it would have looked like with a dread god with all the other power other than Lyndon and what that would have looked like, and um have that kind of be Lyndon's final showdown.
I agree. Yeah, that would have been pretty awesome. And yeah. Anyway, I think that that's a good summary of I think where the book could have been a little bit better. But at the same time, like I think we got a lot of what made the other books enjoyable with Lyndon being
Yeah,
Lyndon and Lyndon helping out his friends and his friends growing and people making sacrifices. And like the Akira storyline was compelling in here. And so I
like
don't know.
like you mean with like Mercy like kind of winning over the loyalty of Charity and like defeating her mother.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, she didn't defeat her mom, right? Or I guess
Well, but she
Garrett.
betrayed her mom. Like I not betrayed, but like she came out again. Like she stuck with her friends over her clan.
Well, yeah, I guess it wasn't like Mercy so much. Like Mercy fought her mom, but wasn't it Yaren killed?
Yeah, Yaren ascended or Yaren became
Yaren
a
became a
monarch
monarch and then killed her.
and killed. Yeah, which but still, it was more the fact that Mercy like um went like kind of the only reason that why that could have happened is because Mercy snuck all of her friends in, right? Like veiled
Yeah.
them and did all that,
Hmm.
which was, in my opinion, like a good, um, you know, finishing up of that storyline.
Yeah.
Um, and so you get all these cool these moments that did really pay off a lot of things that were leading up to the like that we're doing that the series was leading to. Um, so I like those. I like those moments.
Yeah. I some that come to mind. So I liked in general the plot line that Lyndon was like becoming a dread god essentially, right? And you know he kind of has to like stop himself from like with like feeding on the power of the dread gods because he was like losing himself a bit. So I and how he like became like weighted with hunger madra and like stuck on Cradle. I thought that was really interesting and compelling. Another plot line that I really liked was Rhaegon Shen, where he like fled into that like specific like place he had created to hold in Tiberian Aurelius,
Mm-hmm.
and then he died in there. So then he was stuck in there with Tiberian. That was kind of like a funny end to his storyline. And
Yeah.
I don't know. So those were two highlights to me.
Yeah, I like both of those. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, the other highlights throughout the book. And there are just like a lot of them. I think that the biggest ones are the ones we've talked about: the Kura family, the the or the the duel with the guy that had been there from the first book,
Yeah, Lee
and
Markuth.
then them ascending. I really did like too when they would go through and you would get these stories of them like going and like as part of the Reaper squad or whatever.
The Reaper division.
the
Going to
repeated
different
mission.
planets. Yeah, I like those too.
That was fun because
Mhm.
it kind of addressed like there was that one planet with the guns and stuff, and it was like I feel like you get all that stuff with that all the time in fantasy series where like, oh well, if there are modern weapons there, then they would just be able to shoot them and it would be all over. And then
Yeah.
it was like, nope, they just like absorb the power of the like little projectile and it wouldn't really phase
Uh-huh.
them at all, you know. So that
See,
was cool.
I feel like that is what Will White is best at. You know, those fun moments that like you have with characters that like I don't you just kind of like make you chuckle like inside or like as an author he's like I think the bloopers sort of exemplify that really well is just like reading these like hilarious little tidbits of how the story might have gone like so different at like pivotal moments. I so I think like I said, I think that that just shows his strength as an author.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, so we had talked so you like Mercy's storyline, you like Yaren and Yaren's storyline. I mean, well, we didn't really talk that much about Yaren. She she becomes a monarch, kicks butt, ascends, leaving Lyndon behind. Um,
Which I actually do think that was a cool thing for her character because you think back to the beginning of the series and a big part of her character was not wanting to leave Lyndon to fend for himself and being afraid of what would happen if she left Lyndon.
yeah,
You know, that's in the first few books, that happens again in the tournament, that happens again like that. That's a big kind of theme throughout her. And so when she realizes that the only way to beat Malice was to become a monarch, which would mean ascending, and she did it because she knew that's what she had to do, and she like trusted Lyndon and herself and the team. I just think that was really cool, and it was a good, progression moment for her character in more ways than one.
yeah. I actually hadn't thought about that, so I'm glad you brought that up. I totally agree with that, and yeah, and Yaren's plot line in general. It was yeah, that's a good point.
What did you think? Did you like where Yaren ended up? I mean, obviously, I think we've talked about it, and like it was fun seeing them with the kid. But like, did you like her journey getting there?
Um, yeah, I think so. I like ultimately she like uh, she doesn't really like want to be alone again. And I think that she has found that sense of like family and friendship, like not only with Lyndon and with her like her child, obviously, but I think with like Mercy and with Zeal and Little Blue and um I'm blanking on the turtle's name.
Orthos.
Orthos. So like she doesn't have to be afraid of that ever again.
Yeah. Um, this was, it just made me think about that the fact that we hadn't talked about Orthos or Little Blue and like all these side characters again. Like it was fun to see Orthos and Little Blue like progressing and challenging each other and kind of dueling against each other. And it was fun to see. Oh, dang, what's his face? The spirit, his mind spirit.
Dross.
Dross, yeah. And it was fun to see Dross get all these little copies of himself to help them
Mm-hmm.
progress. Like this was all really fun and it took the characters in interesting places that they hadn't explored in the rest of the other books. And so I enjoyed that part of it as well.
Yeah. And you bringing that up does like make me realize like all of the things that Will White fit into this book. You know, I've kind of like criticized or said how like I would have preferred it done. But like he fit a lot in here. And just because I would have done it differently doesn't mean I would have done it better. I
And
mean,
when you do like
definitely not.
I definitely agree with you that some of these battles, like sky battles, is what I think of in my head, like did go on a little bit too long. But when
Mm-hmm.
you think about like all that he had to do and the fact that the book was not that long, like it was in keeping with the lengths of the other books, I think he did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
A really good job. I keep saying like pretty good job. No, this is good. Like it just wasn't like a perfect book, you know what I mean, or a perfect
Hmm.
ending, but I thought it was very satisfying and very
Yeah.
good. It had a lot of baggage for me coming into it with like where I am at with just reading in general right now, I think, which isn't really fair for me to put it on. But
You shared
yeah.
a video that I watched part of that I think basically called this the worst finish to like a book series that they have ever read, which
Yeah.
I think is like so far from I didn't even finish the video. I mean, I didn't want to like I, I mean, a lot of times when I'm reading a book and forming my own opinions, I don't want to read a lot of what other people say just because I'm like, will that influence me to think one way or the other? But like that, I mean, that aside, it just seemed like I don't know how you could say that about this.
Yeah. So the review you're referencing for people that want to go look it up is I think Matt's book reviews, which he makes good videos. I've been watching him on and off for a while. And Matt, if that, for whatever reason you hear this and you want to come on and talk about it, like this, I don't think we're trashing your review. Obviously your opinion is solely valid. But
You're just no, sorry.
well,
Keep
yeah,
going.
I mean, no, seriously, like, obviously
You're
he felt
right.
like
You're
that,
right. Yeah.
which is he's totally opens to that opinion.
My
Um,
opinion's different from his opinion, but
yeah, and I think it
both are
was the
valid.
worst he's read since he also really, really, really hated the ending to the Lost Metal, the ending of Mistborn Era 2. So anyway, um, which I think that everything he said in that video, which this isn't like a response to that video or anything, but I think it was valid. Like I think I can understand why he was bothered by what he was bothered by. But I think what it comes back to for me is that like regardless of these different issues that we've talked about, for me it still felt like a cathartic ending. It still felt like I'm happy that I got to experience this journey with these characters. I'm happy for the ending that we did get. I'm happy that there is a question to my mind on if I would have preferred a more solid ending or more, or this more like ending where it is just launching another series. There is that still question in my mind, but for what it is, it still felt good. And like I finished it. I felt like I had reached like an emotionally satisfying and plot satisfying and like ending for these characters, regardless of like little bumps throughout along the way of things that you can critique.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I would even go further to say that um I think it left just like a little bit open for the future. Like, he can take that little bit and expand it out with like the Reaper division and how it fares in the future. You can obviously expand that into a whole other series, but within the scope of Cradle and the past 12 books, I think it was a fairly minor point. It reminds me of like when you watch a Marvel movie and like, at the end of the credits, you have like they kind of introduce the big bad of the next movie. And it's usually like fairly minor in the scope of the story that you've just watched in Marvel movies. And so I liked that little bit. I liked how they had foreshadowed with the executors, I believe they were called in the past, how they were meant to go in and like kind of clean up worlds, and they all eventually like went crazy and betrayed the Abidan. So it'll be um it'll be exciting to see. I mean, he's got to write more in this, right? I don't know if he's officially said that he's
I,
writing.
I think if he doesn't write more, it would kind of go back and sour my taste a little bit of this series because I felt like so much legwork was done to get it to the point where it would be a good future series. So
Mhm.
if he doesn't do that, then I would be like, there could have been time spent into maybe putting a little bit tighter bows on all of these
Yeah.
storylines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, so let's give ratings to out of 10. Let's give a rating to book 12 Waybound and to Cradle as a whole.
Okay.
So let's first I guess I'll go first. I think with Waybound I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think that it was solid. Um, it was fun. I mean, I had some things that I would have liked done differently, but overall, it didn't take away too much from the story. You know, I actually think I'm gonna go with an 8, just thinking a little bit about it. And so moving to Cradle as a whole, I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. It's a genre I hadn't explored before, and I think it was very fun, fast paced. I think the books were like overall. I think that there were a couple. There was maybe like one or two books that like I wasn't like in love with, but I think the quality of the books overall was pretty high. There weren't like huge slogs through the series, and maybe that's overall a benefit of this specific genre of fantasy. But yeah, I think I was pleasantly surprised. I'm excited to read this with my kids when they're older and tell them the story of Weishi Linden and Yaren and Ethan Aurelius.
You know, that was so awesome, Ryan. And I totally agree. Like I am kind of like, oh dang, when can I start reading this with my kids? And I was chuckling because I was happy because our scores were going to be a little bit different, but then you changed it to be exactly my score. um, so um, I think, yeah, same thing, 8 and 9 respectively for me. I don't think I've given a higher, I don't think I've given a book over an 8. And I don't think that Waybound is the strongest book in the series. So I don't think I can give it over an 8. Um,
Okay.
so maybe like a 7.5 to an 8, because I think I've been averaging around like a 7 for most books, but I'll stick with an 8. Um, and then yeah, the series, I've been saying since the beginning, like the series is more than the sum of its parts. I think that it was again emotionally satisfying. It had a lot to do and it did it very, very well. There are for sure some nitpicks. Some of that could be lowered if he drops it and like totally like doesn't come back to this world at all. Or if, like he does come back to the world and I felt like, none of what happened in Cradle mattered for what he comes back to, because again, there was some of that setup in this book. So that might change. But overall, like I really, really like the series. I think it's great. I think that more people should be reading it. And not only should more people be reading about it, but I think it should be talked about more within like the fantasy circles that I run in, because I think a lot of people that like I like and would do like would be able to get more out of the series. And so yeah, I that's where I'm at with it. I'm really grateful to you for convincing me to read it. Where were we at where you convinced me to start reading it? We were at like a wedding, I feel like.
I don't remember this. I
Dang,
don't remember like where I was in person. I convinced you to read it.
we were in person, yeah, and you were on like book 7 or 8. You were in the middle of reading it. Dang, it's gonna bug me.
Oh, I don't know. It's probably
Yeah,
outside the scope of this of
yeah.
our.
Anyway, I was just mentioning how grateful I am, that you got me to read it,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
and yeah, it was good times. So thanks, and thanks for people listening and commenting and being on this journey with us. Appreciate your support on it.
Great. Well, that wraps up not only this review, but all of our reviews for the Cradle series. And we're excited to hear what you think. If you liked this or hated it, all your opinions are valid, but mine is more valid. Just remember that when you come in and start talking to us, either on Discord, YouTube. I mean, we're on Instagram, pretty much. I think Twitter, pretty much everywhere. Unless it's like super cutting edge, we're probably not there. But Fantology Podcast, I think, is our username where you can find us. And yeah, let us know what you think. And until next time, we'll talk to you, or we'll see you later.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.